thankful that we have it on Facebook. So please make sure that those that you have invited to watch tonight, if they're not already on Facebook, to do so. Well, it is Good Friday. And on this Good Friday, it will be, as it should be every Friday, a somber and darkening experience. Let me explain. This year, more than any other year that in my ministry and in our lives for that matter, we are able to identify with these last days of Jesus quite firsthand. Meaning that on this night, as we will commemorate the reality of Jesus' death, we experience what he experienced that night, and that is isolation. That is separation. It is feeling abandoned, feeling separated from those that we love. Tonight is referred to as a tenebrae service. You'll notice behind me that there are 6 candles on the altar and a 7th candle here in front of the cross. In just a few moments, we will light these candles as a part of the service. And then throughout the service, one by one, after the scripture readings, after characterization of those scriptures, we will extinguish the candles one at a time. The point being, symbolically, that the service begins to darken, just as we feel darkening in our lives as the reality sets in that Jesus does indeed die. I'm thankful to spend this time with you tonight, and I'm even more thankful for the number of youth, the confirmation class, that are participating in very specific ways via video technology, which is just really awesome. So my hope for you tonight is that you journey with me. A Sunday ago, I said that a follower, as distinguished from a bystander and a participant, a follower goes the whole way. And so tonight, I invite you to go the whole way, the whole distance, all the way to the cross, and with great melancholy and sadness, watch Jesus die. Let us journey together. As you listen to a familiar hymn, the old rugged cross playing, we will have the privilege to light the candles and let that light permeate for just a short time until they're extinguished. first reading this evening from Psalms chapter 40, verses 11 through 14 and 17. Do not withhold your mercy from me, O Lord. May your love and your truth always protect me, for troubles without number surround me. My sins have overtaken me, and I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head, and my heart fails within me. Be pleased, O Lord, to save me. O Lord, come quickly to help me. May all who seek to take my life be put to shame and confusion. May all who desire my ruin be turned back in disgrace. Yet I am poor and needy. May the Lord think of me. You are my helper and my deliverer. Oh my God, do not delay.
The pain didn't stop. No matter what he did, Judas could barely lift himself off the ground. It was as if a tremendous weight was sitting on his chest. He felt like he could barely breathe. He leaned against the door of the house of Caiaphas. His hands felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. When he knocked on the door, the ache from his knuckles passed through his body and he nearly collapsed. The door opened, and Judas could tell by the way the servant stared at him that he must have looked as bad as he felt. Judas was led through a hall. The servant constantly had to stop and wait for Judas to catch up. The servant took him into a room where the chief priest sat on the floor around his table. Judas didn't even recognize the voice that came out of his own mouth. "What will you give me if I bring Jesus to you?" They whispered to each other. It didn't take them a full minute. The oldest of the priests stood and counted out 30 pieces of silver into Judas's hands. In spite of the cold he felt on his skin, the coins were so hot he thought surely they would brand his palms. When he stepped into the night, he took a deep breath and filled his lungs with air. It was the first deep breath he'd taken since he'd made his decision. He stood erect, and the pain in his chest and bones was gone. The throbbing in his head had stopped, but the coins still felt hot in his hands. He dumped them into a small leather pouch and tied it to his belt. He couldn't help hearing the coins jingle when he started walking down the dark road. It was an annoyance at first, but soon he was able to ignore it.
A reading from Luke chapter 22, verses 54 through 62. So they arrested him and led him to the high priest's home, and Peter followed at a distance. The guards lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and set around it, and Peter joined them there. A servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. Finally, she said, "This man was one of Jesus' followers." But Peter denied it. "Woman," he said, "I don't even know him." After a while, someone else looked at him and said, "You must be one of them." "No, man, I'm not," Peter retorted. About an hour later, someone else insisted, "This must be one of them, because he is a Galilean too." But Peter said, "Man, I don't know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. At that moment, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Suddenly, the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." And Peter left the courtyard, weeping bitterly.
Peter was the one they called the rock. He was the strong one. He was the one who all others leaned on when they began to question their beliefs. But On this night, when Jesus put his hands on Peter's shoulders, there was a pain in the Messiah's eyes. He was hurt. His face had become heavy and no longer looked like he'd be able to smile again. "Peter," he said, "tonight you will deny 3 times that you even know me." Peter's first response was that of disbelief. He knew there was no way he would deny his friend. But then he saw the Savior's eyes. He knew it was true. He knew. Peter's face then looked determined. He would prove himself wrong. He would hide. He would go someplace where there were no people. He couldn't betray someone if there was no one to talk to, right?
Then, accompanied by the disciples, Jesus left the upstairs room and went as usual to the Mount of Olives. There he told them, "Pray that you will not give in to temptation." He walked away about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. He prayed more fervently, and he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. At last he stood up again and returned to the disciples, only to find them asleep, exhausted from grief. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not give in to temptation."
In the garden, Jesus told his friends to sit and wait for him while he prayed. He walked a few yards away before falling to his knees. He leaned against a large stone and pressed his tired face on the surface. The night air had become cool, and so was the stone. The sweat on his face and hands began to chill him. Finally, Jesus lifted himself on his knees and pressed his hands together, so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Father," he said, "if it is possible, I don't want to die this way, but if you want me to, I will." Jesus closed his eyes. He prayed so hard that blood began to seep from the pores of his skin and fall to the ground like thick clots of mud.
"Why don't you talk to me?" Pilate demanded. "Don't you realize that I have the power to release you or to crucify you?" Then Jesus said, "You would have no power over me at all unless it were given to you from above. So the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." Then Pilate tried to release him, but the Jewish leaders shouted, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar."
"Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate asked. "Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. But the crowd kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." Pilate asked the crowd, "What is it this man did to you? I have found him guilty of nothing." But they shouted, "Crucify him." Pilate said to the crowd, "He is in danger to no one. What has this man done?" The crowd continued to shout, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Finally, Pilate said, "I wash my hands of his blood. You will take full responsibility for his death." The crowd cried out, "Crucify him!"
Standing near the cross were Jesus' mother and his mother's sister, Mary, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus saw his mother standing there beside the disciple he loved, he said to her, "Dear woman, here is your son." And he said to this disciple, "Here is your mother." And from then on, this disciple took her into his home.
I watched every moment. It is the hardest thing any mother could ever have to do, but if through his swollen, blackened eyes, he looked down from that cross, darkened by the shadow of awful crucifixion, I wanted to make sure that he saw the face of one person who loved him. And he did. I almost broke down. His eyes met mine, the eyes that looked up at me from that hay-filled manger, the eyes that brimmed with tears as I cleaned his skin to elbow. The eyes that read the scrolls in the synagogue, the eyes that looked over Jerusalem and wept, the eyes that saw every need, every wound, every hurt, every sinful soul, and refused to look away. I knew long ago he was meant for a purpose. When you're visited by an angel, you start to understand this baby you're carrying might be something more. These moments I've treasured in my heart, but a mother will worry, won't she? And I have. The more attention he drew to himself, the more the authorities threatened and whispered. The more I found myself wishing he would just come back to the carpenter shop and make a simple living. Today, on that cross, his arms spread, I am almost positive that I saw on that bruised, wounded, blood-covered face, beyond belief, a smile. And I knew before he said them the words that would come next.
One of the criminals hanging next to Jesus insulted him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." Responding, the other criminal spoke harshly to him. "Don't you fear God, seeing that you've also been sentenced to die? We are rightly condemned, for we are receiving the appropriate sentence for what we did. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus replied, "I assure you that today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon, and darkness covered the whole earth until about 3 o'clock, while the sun stopped shining. Then the curtain in the sanctuary tore down the middle. Crying out in a loud voice, Jesus said, "Lama sabachthani," Father, into your hands I entrust my life. After he said this, he breathed for the last time.
my Lord. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble.
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 Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Were you there when they nailed him to the tree?
Were you there when they nailed him to the tree?
Were you there when they nailed him to the tree?
Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble.
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 Were you there when they nailed him to the tree?
Were you there when they nailed him to the tree?
Were you there when they laid him in the tomb?
Were you there when they laid him in the tomb?
Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble.
To tremble.
Tremble.
Were you there when they laid him in the tomb?
Were you there when they laid him in the tomb?
Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
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 Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Eli! Lama sabachthani!
Much